Andy Lopata. Like many businesses, earlier this year, we were struggling. We had to adapt to our world coming down around us as the pandemic meant that so much of our business disappeared. And as we went through that change, that process of finding out how we were going to adjust, we watched as the bank account dripped down and down and down towards that dreaded overdraft limit. And all the time, the government was providing support to so many businesses, but we felt left out in the cold. There never seemed to be that support for us. And then the bounce back loan came along. And that to us was the bridge. A modest bounce back loan would allow us to just get across to a transition where we were starting to bring revenue back into the business again. So we applied for a modest loan. And about a week later, we received a letter from the bank, computer generated letter, that said that because of something that they had discovered in the checks they had to go through as part of the application process, we didn't qualify for a loan. There was no alternative, no phone number to call. There was no right of appeal. There was no explanation. It simply said, very coldly, as a result, we have cancelled your application. This was a huge blow to us and our business. And it was a huge blow to our morale as well. And I had to be out there talking to clients, talking to potential clients, talking to my network, generating new opportunities, all the while dealing with the impact of this on the morale of everyone in the business, and also battling the bureaucracy of the bank to try and get a resolution, because I'm not the type of person to sit down and take that. But what I did is what everyone does. I put on my mask and I went out there and I put a brave face on for the world. And when people said, how are you coping? I was fairly honest, to be honest, for reasons that will become apparent. But I had to show that we were successful as well. It's what we do all of the time. But this year in particular, it's been heightened by what's been going on as a result of the pandemic. Think of every conversation you've had in recent days. How much do you really know what's been going on behind the mask that those people you've been talking to have been wearing? How many people you've spoken to have been worried about their jobs, whether they've been furloughed, whether they face redundancy? How many of those people you've spoken to have worried about the future of their businesses? How many of the people you've spoken to have been worried about their health? How many of them have been worried about their families and their friends, whether it's their health, whether it's their prospects? But all the time, they're presenting a strong, positive impression to the rest of the world. We all wear that mask all the time, and there are good reasons to do so. My fear is that we wear it too much and too often, and also we forget that other people are wearing theirs as well. And we need to engage in a different, more honest way. If we did, we'd all be so much more successful and so much happier. Think about the classic icebreaker question and how you respond to it, whether it's the social version of how are you, or whether it's the business version of how's business. We all ask that, and we are asked it countless times every week. And our response is always the same. I saw this on Twitter last year, and it did lead to a smile. It's the British emoticon wheel. And the response to every question, fine, thanks. Fine, thanks, fine, thanks, fine, thanks. We lie all the time. We lie to people when they ask how we are. We lie to ourselves when we answer that question. If I asked you now, how are you going to respond? Fine, thanks. If you were really struggling, would you tell me? If you really weren't okay, if you really weren't fine, is there anyone you would tell? And that's the key I want to focus on today. Who do you turn to for support? And how honest, how vulnerable are you with your network? Let me tell you where this came from. I've talked about wearing masks, and it's something that I was doing a lot a few years ago. I went through a period where after some real success in the business, we had dipped and the business was really struggling. And I think, every business is a roller coaster of some sorts, and ours has been no different. That was one of the biggest dips that we'd faced. And at one point we were within a few £100 of having to call it a day. And then 2 huge contracts came in and turned it around. But before that happened, I was out there, I was meeting people, I was having conversations and seeking new opportunities and wearing my mask. And I realized that it wasn't serving me when I was at a meeting of the Professional Speaking Association in Reading. And the Professional Speaking Association is a community I have been a core and integral member of since I joined in 2003. I'm now on the board. I head up the fellows. It's my tribe. We call each other our tribe, and a lot of my closest friendships have come from that community. And I was at this event in Reading, and in the networking at the beginning of the meeting, it was the same conversation that I've just covered. How's business, Andy? It's great. It's fine. I didn't tell anyone the truth, and this was my close community, my tribe. We went into the first part of the session, and it was a workshop run by a speaker called Stephen Houghton Burnett. And Stephen had given us all a questionnaire to fill in at the beginning of the workshop, and we filled it in. And then he went around the room and he sort of found out what the answers were. And 2 of the questions were the same, and they were focused on different aspects of our businesses. So there was one focused on our speaking businesses and one focused on those who had a non-speaking related business. And the question was, how would you describe that business? And there were 4 options. Is it growing? Is it stable? Is it new? Is it in decline? And when we got to those questions, Stephen asked the room for a show of hands who answered which question. So he asked on both questions, how many of you said that your business is growing, and hands went up. And then he asked how many of your businesses are stable, and hands went up. And then he asked how many of your businesses are new, and hands went up. And then he asked how many of your businesses are in decline, and nobody's hand went up for either question. There were liars in that room. I know there were liars in that room. I was lying. My business was in huge decline. And yet, even when asked specifically the question, I couldn't own up and be honest about it. That was a turning point for me. I realized I'd been doing this for a while. And if I couldn't share with that community, my trusted community, who could I share with? And if I wasn't sharing, someone who considers himself fairly open and honest, what about everyone else? So I made a commitment to myself at that point. I said, I'm going to turn this around with the help of other people. And when I've done that, I'm going to speak at the annual convention of the PSA and urge the community to do the same. And that's exactly what I did. In 2016, I stood on the main stage and I delivered the presentation, which I called at the time Bigger Than You, that led to this new book, Just Ask. And the response really backed up what I had assumed all the time. So many people came up and said the impact it made on them and how it resonated. One member sent an email that evening to everyone in his local region saying, I've got to be honest with you. And his talk has made me realize I need to open up more. And I've seen a lot more of that transparency over the years. Between Stephen's workshop and me delivering that presentation, Stephen posted a blog on LinkedIn called Broke But Not Broken. Now, Stephen made a lot of money when he sold his tech businesses a few years ago, but his blog said he'd lost it all. And he blamed his ego for not sharing sooner. He said that it had actually been going on for a while, but his ego got in the way of him telling people, and that had damaged relationships and it had damaged his emotional well-being. And that's what we've got to be aware of, the damage we're doing when we bottle things up. The speaker before me at the conference when I delivered my Bigger Than You presentation was a good friend of mine. And the co-author of my second book, And Death Came Third, Peter Roper. And Peter talked about his journey into bankruptcy and then back again in his presentation. Now, I knew about this by this stage. Peter had written a book on the topic and we'd talked about it many times. I didn't know about it when it was happening. And when it was happening was when we were working closely together, writing and publishing, and death came third. Peter never mentioned it to me once. In his talk and the title of his book, he talks about running on empty. And Peter never really gave us that opportunity to fill him up, to give him the support that he needed. Peter never really gave us the opportunity to help him refuel. And we're all doing that all of the time and time again. I was the same. I talked about in Stephen's blog where he said that not asking for help had damaged his emotional well-being in his relationships. It also stops people helping us. While I was on my own journey, I bumped into a fellow professional speaker at a private members club in London, and he asked how I was. And this time I told him, and I told him what was happening with the business. And he took a step back and he said, "How can I help?" And we talked for a while. And over the next couple of weeks, I received 2 referrals from him. I've had referrals since. I never had any referrals before. And I mentioned this to him a while ago. And he said, "I never thought you needed any help. It was only when you were honest with me and you said that I thought, oh my God, how can I help Andy? Before that, it would never have occurred to me." All that time we're wearing the mask and we're presenting this face to the public. We're preventing people who love us and want to support us from offering us that help. Why do we do this? Why are we so self-destructive? And is it just me? Is it just a small group of people? Or is it a number of people? I think it's more widespread than you may think. And I think there are a number of reasons why it's happening. Our biggest fear, the biggest driver not to share, is a fear of looking bad, of looking weak, of looking like we're not in control. So we put on a cape and we present a superhero version of ourselves to the people around us all of the time. You know, we talked about that with Stephen's blog where he talked about his ego. You see it on social media all the time. In Just Ask, I interviewed my niece, Sam, because I wanted to understand how vulnerability impacts or plays out for the millennial generation, her generation. And we talked about social perfectionism, and it's a concept that came up more than once in the book. And social perfectionism is the supercharged version of looking good. It's this need to look our best possible at all times. And it's really illustrated by our selfie culture. But for every selfie you see on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, how many didn't make the cut? How many versions of this video do you think there were before this one that you're watching now? We have this need for everything to be absolutely perfect. And that desire to be perfect has a negative impact on us all the time. And it stops us being vulnerable and admitting what we don't know and asking for, seeking help. I do think it's changing. I think that landscape's changing. It started with Brené Brown, with her TED Talks and her books about vulnerability. We now see hosts of celebrities from all types of worlds, from sports, from music, from wider entertainment, from politics, even royalty, talk about their challenges, their fears, their vulnerabilities. And that's so healthy. So we are on the beginning of this journey, but we're still driven by that need to look good. Hearing other people, particularly people who we associate with success and strength, admit that they're not always feeling successful or strong really helps, but we're not there yet. So looking good is the primary factor in what holds us back. Beyond that, I think that there's a major issue with worrying about being a burden to other people. So we don't ask for help because we don't want to be a pain in the backside, to put it simply. But let me ask you this. When was the last time you helped someone that you really like and you knew it turned out well? How did it make you feel? Chances are you took pleasure from it. You took pleasure from their success as a result of your input. So if we take pleasure from helping other people, Why don't we let other people take pleasure from helping us? There's a real disconnect there. It's about asking people who we know will want to help us, not complete strangers. There's a whole discussion around that separately. But people who want to help us get pleasure from doing so. Let's make it easy for them to do so. That guarantees the pleasure. If you make it hard for them to help and you give them huge tasks, then maybe the pleasure isn't so great. But simple tasks that could have a big impact on us will give those people great pleasure. So make it easy for them to do so. And the other thing that holds us back is we assume people don't want to help us. Don't assume. It's not down to you to make that decision. Leave that decision to them. Just make it easy for them to say no. Make it easy for them and make it easy for yourself to deal with a rejection. Because understand that someone saying no isn't actually a rejection. There are countless reasons why people might say no to you. And yes, you might be one of the reasons, but if you're asking the right people, then you're probably at the bottom of that list of reasons they say no. So grow a thicker skin. Make it okay to say no to the request and communicate that to them and communicate it to yourself as well. But don't just assume that people don't want to help you or won't help you because there's something in an inner voice telling you so. Put yourself out there and find out. And when we're willing to share and we're looking to share, we need to know when and where and with whom we can share. I touched earlier on it being trusted network and people who want to help you rather than complete strangers. I did when I was writing Just Ask, I wanted to explore whether people felt more comfortable talking to strangers where their judgment wouldn't have so much impact, where there was less risk of looking bad in front of people who knew you and knew the same network. And there are arguments for it. But most people I talked to said that they weren't interested in sharing with strangers, and it was people close to them that they looked for. So think about people you trust. You trust in their judgment. You trust that they won't judge you, and you trust in their discretion as well. People that you're happy surrounding yourself with. It doesn't necessarily have to be people within your business, within your team. There are strong arguments to find people who can be more objective as well. But just ask yourself, are you making yourself open for people to help you? And really recognizing where that support can come from and who would want to help you as well, going back to the previous topic we were talking about. And then understanding within that relationship what makes it work. I think there are three key things. They're all interlinked as well. The first is authenticity and integrity. It's being able to speak from the heart and be completely open and completely honest. The more that you open up to people, the more they'll relate to what you're saying, the more they'll want to help you, and the easier it is for them to really recognize the help and support that you need. And that integrity is key, that honesty. Absolutely. Don't wear any masks when you're asking for help and support. Every mask you wear makes it harder and tougher for people to be there for you. You need trust and reliability. Your network knowing that they can trust you and they can turn to you when they need your help, and you knowing that you can trust them, and people being there when you need them and vice versa. Absolutely key. And then commitment and accountability. You need people who are going to hold your feet to the fire. They're going to, just because they're giving you advice and insight, if that's what you need, doesn't mean you have to take it. But it does mean you have to take it seriously. You consider it, you weigh it up. Ultimately, it's your life, so you have to be responsible for the decisions you make within it. But they want to know that you're committed to listening to them, to taking them seriously, and then being accountable for what you say you are going to do moving forward. If you can bring that authenticity and integrity, the trust, reliability, and reciprocity, and commitment and accountability to those relationships, then you really are going to get the help and support that you need. And of course, it works the other way as well. That's the reciprocity. It doesn't mean that in every conversation you say, right, how can I help you? But it's about people knowing that you're there for them if they need you. But there are times when reciprocity is built into the relationship, and that's where you have a more formal relationship of support. You've got that network around you. Now force yourself to use it. I'm in 3 mastermind groups. One of them with fellow speakers, one of them with fellow business people, and one of them a lighter touch but more frequent, just check-ins with fellow entrepreneurs. And having that regular check-in, a structured process with the two main mastermind groups where we present challenges and we find solutions following a strict agenda, having a strict Chatham House rule, having a balance of people in that group where we all have something to give and we all have something to gain, brings so much to my business and to my life. And my mentoring relationships as well, the discipline of having someone who is there for me that I need to think about what I want from them, forcing me to focus in on what my challenges may be, is absolutely vital. I think one of the biggest reasons we don't ask for help enough is we're not thinking about it. It's the old adage of working in the business rather than on the business. Having a mentor or a mastermind group forces you to break free of that day-to-day work and really focus on what you need right now. Understand what outcomes you're looking for and then be honest about them when you turn up to the mastermind group, to the mentoring relationship, whatever it may be. But have that formal process in there to really draw the vulnerability out of you. But with everything I've said, bring your whole self to the relationship and don't worry about looking good. Don't worry about what people think. Worry about what they say and what they can bring to help you to drive forward and overcome the obstacles in your way. We did get the bounce back loan. I took it up with my local MP. I took it up with the CEO of the bank. I worked with the CEO's office, and ultimately we discovered that there'd been some fraud on the account we weren't aware of. The black mark was lifted and the loan was granted. We also got a little bit of extra as an apology and a big basket of goodies for the bank, from the bank to say, we're sorry for the massive inconvenience caused. And there's good news in the business. You know, we have turned things around and we're celebrating a record quarter during a pandemic, which is fantastic. And what was really nice about the bank story is that it wasn't just us. By exposing the problems with our account, the bank uncovered a series of files where a black mark had been put on those accounts by an external credit agency with nothing to do with the holders of the accounts themselves. All of those people have been turned down for bounce back loans as well. All of those black marks were lifted. So it's lovely to have a positive end, not just for us, but on the wider business community as well. But it's not like that for everyone, and not every ending has been happy. While I was on my journey between recognizing my need to ask for more help and delivering my talk at that PSA convention, I discovered that someone I knew well through networking had passed away. And I went to his memorial service and it was packed out. And one by one, as they often do at these events, people stood up and they shared their memories of our friend. And everyone who shared talked about how generous he was, how giving he was, how he was always there for other people. Someone flew in from Africa and said that he'd flown to Africa at his own expense for 2 weeks to help her set up a charity. Someone else had flown in from America and said, and this really resonated for me. He said, I still don't know what he did for a living because every time we met, he was only interested in asking about me. We found out not long afterwards that he'd committed suicide and he'd killed himself because of money issues. There was plenty of money in that room and there was so much love in that room, and no one in that room would have wanted this outcome instead of the possibility, the opportunity of helping our friend. The help and the support that you need is out there for you. It's among your friends and among your family. It's among your clients, your suppliers, and your wider network. But it's up to you to reach out and seek it. It's up to you to recognize the support you need, understand where it can come from, and ultimately just ask. Thank you.